Chapter 7. The first year after Evelyn completed the group and accepted their paths as God's blessed was a fast-moving one. The children became everything they needed to be and more. They learned to bake, basic sewing, and learned the history of the old ones. They learned the art of patience and the talent of charm. The seasons and holidays came and passed. Their skills expanded beyond imagination. Matilda's powers were no longer restricted to animals, though her other skills were weak at best. But she pushed herself relentlessly. Adeline's powers of prophecy were finally under control, and she could sleep at night, and her healing knew no bounds. Niall, Evelyn, and Aubrey had made steady progress until they were overall powerful little children. However, while they all increased their power strengths, no one increased their control as much as Celine. Now that she was in a place where she could be herself openly, where if she actually lit something on fire, it wasn't a big deal, she experimented. Celine's powers were still greatly tied into her emotions, and she lashed out when angered. So far, all the injuries were easy enough and good practice for all the children, as Nelina insisted that all her wards knew the basic of healing. Celine got along with almost everyone, but for some reason she clashed heavily with Mathilde, and often those two would be found squabbling and resulting in burns to Mathilde and animals attacking Celine. The closeness of the 6 children was the important part. Nelina watched as they snuck out at night time, studied together, arguing over the morality of lessons they were learning about their gods, and she became more and more relieved when they were able to hold on to their humanity. The gods knew she struggled with her own humanity. Today the children all had pin money and were sent out in the village where a few tinkers had come for their yearly visit to the village. The children were accompanied only by their maids and a few soldiers. Accepted in the village, they were much beloved by the locals, for Lady Nelina's powers had never been a secret, and they had all been raised with her rule. The children were not revered as blessed, but treated as equals. Celine was hoping to be able to find a whetstone or something to polish her quickly expanding collection of weapons. Niall and Evelyn wanted sweets. Adeline was on a mad hunt for some herbs that she could not find locally. Mathilde was arguing with the head tinker on the treatment of his animals, and Aubrey was hunting through the few books. The soldiers and maids were distracted looking at different things, when a tinker grabbed Celine's arm. Her head shot up. Violet eyes licked flames, screaming murder. Growing up with the brothers she had, the family she had been blessed, or cursed, with made her wary of strangers. She barely trusted the Lady Nelina and her fellow blessed. In fact, just Fidelius, her only trusted friend. "Are you the Princess Celine?" the tinker asked in a raspy voice. Celine hesitated for a long moment. Nelina had warned her not to say her name, as she was still avoiding her father. She glanced behind her, looking for Helen, who was busy flirting with one of the tinkers. She was about to pull herself free and go back to the group when he added, "I have a birthday present from your mother." Her eyes lit up in a desperate desire to hear any news. She was still haunted by the forced estrangement from the only one who had ever loved her. Celine didn't even care for her present, just a word of her queenly mother, who passing rumors claimed was ill and kept away from the public now. "Yes? Is she safe? My father's not hurt her, has he? Oh, Fidelius needs to hear this." She twisted to call out for Helen, but her words died on her lips when he yanked hard on her hand. "Please, princess, none must know I come from her, for your father has forgiven her for hiding your gifts, but he has forbidden her to acknowledge you. She sends you this gift." He lifted a small box onto the table. She looked down at the box with curiosity, reaching out a rough hand to clip open the latch. She was so focused on the box that she missed the eager sneer on the man's face as success was blooming for him. However, before she could fully open the small box, another hand slammed the box closed, and she looked up to find Mathilde standing beside her, glaring at the man. "Mathilde, what do you think you're doing?" she demanded hotly, about to smack her hand off the open it when Helen placed her hand on her shoulder. The tinker suddenly looked extremely nervous. A fine line of sweat appeared on his brow as he was suddenly surrounded by soldiers and 6 of the youngest, but if rumor had it, exceedingly powerful children. Just a gift for the little princess," he stammered. Mathilde cut him off, her voice cold. "Aye, so why is it the animals inside this box tell me that they are some of the most poisonous of their kind? They have been starved for weeks, and had some little hedge witch ordered them to kill the first person to open this box." The soldiers' hands went to their swords, and the tinker nearly passed out. Fidelius turned to the head tinker Duril, who had been traveling to the manor with his caravan for many years. "How long has this man been traveling with you?" His gaze looking amongst the tinker train, this group came through annually, and they were always quite friendly and never caused problems before. In fact, if he correctly remembered, Lady Nelina had said these tinkers had been coming for years, ever since Duril had been a little boy himself. "Just joined a few weeks ago, but had some good products, and he only wanted to get it to the east where his family was, so he claimed," Duril told them, his own eyes blazing. He did not want this man causing problems with his normal customers, especially with Lady Nelina, who had always been so kind to him. "Well, I think we should question him further," Fidelius muttered, drawing his blade. However, with a flick of her wrist, Celine sent his blade slamming back into its sheath. All 6 children had drawn closer together, and Celine kept her eyes on the sweating man as she pushed the box towards Mathilde. Fidelius would have protested, and he tried, but a cold look and a push of her power from Adeline silenced any protest. Mathilde flipped open the lid, and the man threw himself back against his wagon in fear. She crooned low in her throat, offering her hand as 2 bright blue snakes slowly slithered out of their cage and wrapped around her arm. "Hello, my darlings." One of the snakes slithered all the way up to her neck, where Mathilde rubbed her head against his own face. "I suppose no one told this man who is being taught with Celine, the one who speaks to all animals." She spoke to the snakes through her eyes lifted, and she had Celine exchanged a smirk. The man who bolted, however, had not gone a few feet when the soldiers lunged at him, but suddenly he tripped, and with a scream was wrapped in ropes and suspended in the air, dangling upside down. Aubrey smiled cruelly, as with a beckoning hand the man was dragged closer to her. He peered at them with a frightened stare. Celine tipped her head, and even though she looked exactly like her mother, all he saw was her father's outraged glare and promise of retribution in her cruel gaze. "Let's see how much we can make you talk." She spoke in her sweet little girl's voice as she pivoted and walked away. Aubrey smirked, and with a blink he hit the ground with a hard grunt. The soldiers hoisted him up between them as they walked back through the village, no one stopping them as they walked into the manor. How Lady Nelina always knew something was about to happen, they never knew, but by the time they entered the hall she was already standing waiting for them all. Duril threw himself at her mercy, but her smile to him was kind of sympathetic. "Nonsense! How would you know that he was sent to assassinate my darling girl? Now, do you want to stay for what is about to happen?" She patted him on the hand. The guards were ordered to bind the man and take him to the workroom. Duril asked to stay. After all, he was responsible for this man nearly being able to assassinate a princess, and he was no stranger of magic. They went to the workroom or library, depending on which half of the room you were in. The books that lined the shelves on one wall were all spells and histories of witchcraft. Herbs and jars full of potions lined a second wall. Cauldrons and fireplaces lined another wall. It was well worked in and had seen a great deal of work the last year. Duril's hair stood up all over his body, and he shuddered in fear, and almost choked on his own tongue, when the 6 children walked in as if they owned the place, rummaging into the supplies that they needed. When he looked in their eyes, no longer did he find the kind eyes of the lady of the manor and the children he had met in the last year. Although their visits were always brief, he had also seen Mathilde in her heartlands. He saw the cold, cruel eyes of the divine looking at him, and he was terrified into dropping his eyes, and he fought the urge to cower. Celine pointed at the still bound assassin, and he moved to the middle of a circle carved into the floor. The ropes vanished, and he fell into a heap with a yell. He bolted up and tried to run for the door, but at the circle's edge he smashed back as if he had hit an invisible wall. His nose broke, and blood splattered all over his face. A high-pitched giggle echoed in the room, and the assassin looked up. Evelyn smiled at him, a chilling, bright smile. She circled just outside the circle, careful not to tread in it. "I know what you're thinking. You think that if you make it to the door, you'll be free. But the second you stepped a foot on this land intending to hurt one of us, you were dead. You may have been walking, talking, breathing, but you were dead. And now you're going to tell us everything." She took an old flint dagger and sliced her palm, turned her hand over, and squeezed her fingers into a fist, dropping blood into the circle. When it touched the ground, it sizzled, and smoke began to rise. Her smile turned sinister, and she handed the knife to Adeline, who cut herself as well and passed it on until each of the 6 children, and Nelina, had burned the circle. Duril paled in fear as he looked at the faces of the blessed at that moment. He nearly knelt in reverence, but at the last second caught himself and merely stepped back and lowered his eyes respectfully. There was no joy, no human traits. Their faces were harsh, etched in divinity, and he had a hard time looking at them. He felt the deepest urge to place himself at their mercy. He muttered a simple prayer to his god. Their magic was not like those Duril had seen before. They didn't need smoke, chanting, or smell casting. They merely stood together, ringed around the circle and eyes on each other. All except the Princess Adeline. Slowly, in a nearly seductive way, she lowered herself to kneel in front of this man. Her eyes were soft, and she tipped her head to the side. "Poor wee lamb, just doing your duties to your king," she crooned at him, and with her words, her very presence began to pulsate out. Duril staggered back and against the table. Not that the blessed even seemed to hear him. Duril felt nearly sick, controlled by the tone of Adeline's voice, coaxing him to give her answers. At first, the captive refused. With a sweet smile, Adeline's eyes flashed a harsh color of black, and the man wailed as he began to see things in front of his face. He clawed at his face, and then began to scratch at his arms. The man did not last long. Soon after Adeline began her visions, he began to weep and beg. They learned much from him, and with every revelation that her father's hired killer gave, Celine's heart broke more. Her eyes initially flashed pain, but then they flashed a cold fire, and her heart hardened 1,000 times over. Celine's hands were clasped together, her eyes coldly calculating as she considered the assassin. While Nelina was pleased that her charges worked well together, her heart was aching for her darling Celine. When they had all got all that they could from him, the children stepped back, panting and exhausted. Adeline swayed where she knelt. "Break the enchantment, Adeline," ordered Nelina. Adeline flicked her fingers, causing the man to fall in exhaustion and Adeline to sag. Aubrey and Njal stepped to her side and helped her rise. Their faces and posture finally turned back to their usual selves. Duril felt the pressure on him ease, and he, too, was exhausted. Celine was too incensed to stay still, so she paced while Helen made a quick restorative potion and Fidelius drew cold water from the well. Hurt beyond measure, she wanted the best way to get it across to her father that she was not a little girl to be toyed with anymore. "Nelina, is there a way to prolong the snake's poison so instead of being dead in a matter of hours, a victim could survive for something such as a week or two?" Nelina and Adeline exchanged thoughtful, considering glances, and Adeline responded, "I believe I can put a longevity agent into a potion with the venom, and it should give a person 10 days, perhaps up to 14. Yes. Why?" Celine smiled at Helen as she pressed a goblet with the restorative in her hand and took a deep drink from it before answering. "Because we're going to send this assassin back to my father with a present for him from me." She smirked mercilessly as her eyes connected with Nelina. She could have sworn her teacher's eyes shone with approval and pride. The plan Celine unveiled to them was strong, but Mathilde gave a suggestion that twisted it to the borderline cruel, and for only the second time ever, she had ever really liked Mathilde. They would have started that very second, but Nelina shooed them out until tomorrow, claimed they needed a rest if they were going to make the potion. They were excused from their afternoon classes to rest after the day's activities. Celine swept out as if she was not having a hard time at all. The sharp eyes of Fidelius saw through her, and he followed her to her room. "Leave us, Helen," he ordered her lady's maid, who hastily left the chamber. Celine stood staring out the big windows that were in her bedroom. Quietly, Fidelius closed the door and walked towards her. Once behind her, gently and slowly he pulled her into his arms, where she burst into tears at the betrayal, her family. Evelyn was awaited by her father, who had heard of the assassination attempt. Looking at his tired daughter, he picked her up and cradled her in his arms to carry her to their cottage, attached to the smithy. Inside waited her stepmother, Jean, nursing the couple's young son who had been born a few months before Johnny. "Bill, what happened?" Jean asked, standing up and setting Johnny in the cradle at her feet. "Just a hard magic session. The children had to interrogate an assassin who had set out to kill Princess Celine." He lowered Evelyn into her bed and then sat beside her. "Ah, the poor princess. I'll get Ebby some broth to help her sleep," Jean said, following them into the room and tucking the blankets lovingly around her stepdaughter. Jean was quite young and had been an ideal choice of a second wife for Bill, given too that she did not fear the magic of his daughter from his first marriage. She also loved Ebby, as much as if she had come from her own loins. She hurried from the room to spoon Evelyn some broth she had been simmering over the fire before she fell completely asleep. The next day was cloudy, and the Tinkers were quite relieved that there were no hard feelings. They were invited to stay until the weather turned pleasant. The assassin spent the night tied to a chair, passed out cold from the soft torture. You would think a man who tortured and killed for a living would have been able to withstand more. When the children and Nelina walked in, he was still passed out. Mathilde had the two snakes with her, gently wrapping around her neck and in her hair. They had been properly fed and happy with the new mistress. While Adeline and Aubrey began to set up to make a potion, Mathilde started to bleed the poison from the willing snakes. Niall and Celine began to concoct a curse together, and Evelyn worked on a way to make a curse carry as far as they wanted it to. And Nelina merely sat and sipped her morning tea, watching her students work. King Eshek was in for a huge surprise. Any looks the King of the Isles used to have had been long lost to Beergut, bad skin, and a hazy expression over dull eyes. On this particularly sunny day Queen Rosabelle was with him, a brand new bruise shining on her cheek, her belly protruding from the attentions her husband so angrily bestowed on her since she had defied him. She wore a humble gown of blue wool. The royal couple and their 7 sons stared at the man in front of them. He had only left their kingdom a few months ago, but in that time he was nearly emaciated, swayed hypnotically, his eyes were haunted, and he had self-harm wounds over his face, like he had ripped his own face with his fingernails when things got too hard for him. Queen Rosabelle only knew him as her husband's head assassin, and he had always been a healthy, albeit evil man, and her jaw sagged at seeing him so destroyed. She had no idea what new person her husband wanted to kill, but assassin had never missed on a case. The man that would have done this to him must have been terrifying. Her husband's fingers drummed on his arm of his wild-looking throne, a sure sign that he was angry, and the queen uneasily shifted slightly away from him, away from the coming eruption. "I sent you to murder the Pirate King 7 years ago, and you did it with no problem. You have removed several threats to my throne, strong, intimidating, powerful men. So tell me, why you look like you are close to death, and my little witch of a daughter's head is not currently being mounted on a pike beside the heads of my enemies." His voice rose in pitch, and he slammed his fist down on his throne, causing his wife to jump in alarm. Her head whipped away from the assassin to stare at her husband. "You sent him to assassinate our daughter?" Her rage made her forget how her husband would treat her after her behavior to him in public. He did not answer, but turned and slapped her hard across the face, causing a cry to leave her lips. None of the men in attendance made a move to help the queen. Her daughter-in-law flinched, but Prince Zahir quietly and nonchalantly handed his mother a handkerchief. The servants shifted their weight in quiet anger, but they knew better than to lift a hand to help her in public. The assassin gave a loud groan, and his fingers raked down his bare arms, leaving bloody marks. "Oh, gods," he moaned, his eyes blank. It couldn't. Too strong. Well protected. She's too well guarded," he stammered. The king guffawed. "Our spies stated that they are a small household of 6 evil children and their small retinues. Killing Celine should have been easy." The assassin's eyes snapped back into focus, staring at the king as his legs gave out and he fell to the floor. Small but powerful. She sent me with a present for your majesties. He crawled like a broken beast to the feet of the king and carefully extracted from his tattered shirt a letter he offered to the king, signed with a seal not seen by the eyelids before. The king's jaw twitched as he handed it to his queen, for his reading was mediocre at best. The assassin also withdrew something wrapped in cloth. Eshek took it out and unwrapped one of the pearl necklaces that he had given his queen. He curled his fist tightly around it and glared at his wife. With shaky hands, the queen first traced the outline of the silver wax seal. It was in the shape of the Isle's nobility, a sea trident, but it was surrounded in flames, and the crescent moon before breaking it and opening the scroll. A hot tear rolled down her bruised cheek to fall on her gown. To the Queen of the Isles, Rosabelle, daughter of the King Diamond II. My dearest mother, I hope this letter finds you well and your health is still upon you. I miss you, mother. You were always the one constant in my young life. From the day of my birth to this day, you have loved and protected me, cherished me when no one else has, and I am only here because of you. I am learning not just how to be ladylike, but more. Sums and politics like you wanted. I have learned how to control my temper and my powers. Lady Nelina says my powers are extremely linked in emotions, on who I want to protect, who has my loyalty. So I have been trained how to fight with my magic. The soldiers here are finally teaching me how to be a warrior, and I am most skilled in the short sword, for I do not have the patience of a bowman. My ability to heal and be a prophet is failing. I can heal small, non-important injuries, but none of my fellow blessed have abilities in defense that I have. I am a blessed mother, though as of this letter I am writing to you, I have yet to be claimed by a god or goddess, and we have no ideas because my powers are so uniquely mine. I wish I could see you, mother, ensure that your husband is treating you well, though I know he probably is not. I wish I could protect you, mother, as you so often protected me. I hope you will relay my regards to my father and tell him that he better try harder next time. I am not so easily vanquished. I look forward to his next move. I will be his legacy, what the world remembers of him. Please also, mother, tender my regards to the assassin. I promised him that if he came to the Isles soon enough, that he would not die by the snake's bite. However well my sisters prevented the poison instantly killing someone. He will die, within 14 days of when he was bitten. Hopefully he has not fully descended into madness by then. Long live the Queen. Signed, Her Royal Highness, Princess Celine of the Isles. Queen Rosabelle paused and wiped the tears coursing down her face before reading the bottom of the letter. If father is still holding the necklace, please inform him that he should now be cursed. He'll figure out how soon enough. She lowered the letter. Her crying was drowned out by the screams of the assassin, who upon hearing the words began to gouge his face, weeping as he pierced his own eyes out, screaming louder and louder, unintelligible words before her eldest son. In mercy strode forward with a swipe of his sword, beheading the madman. The king gave a roar of outrage as he stood, and with a ferocious kick sent the offending head flying across the hall. He turned back to his wife, whose hand was clutching her distended belly, her tears flowing silently now, and her face looked full of pain. Having seen his wife begin labor with many of his seed, he knew what was happening, and he grabbed her by the throat, pulling her up as her hands clasped at his hand. When he opened his mouth to speak, a great flash of pain crossed his face, and he stumbled away from her, unable to breathe. His fingers circled his throat as he began to cough, as did Rosabelle, staring at him with eyes wide with comprehension. Finally, when he could speak, it was in a snarl. This time, my dear, you'd better birth me a son, or else. The first sign of magic, I will slice their throat myself. The maids helped the queen to her rooms. It took 2 days for the queen to birth her last child. When the king finally awoke from a drunken stupor and he walked into the room, it was to see a pile of bloody rags and sheets. The queen's face was white and clammy, and she fluttered in and out of consciousness. As Eshek looked at her midwife, walked to him and bowed, better to hide the look of disdain in her eyes. Your Highness, I do not know if the queen or her child shall survive. If she does, she needs peace and quiet, and she will never have another child as long as she lives. He barely glanced at the child in the cradle. How long until you know if they will survive? If the queen survives to the end of the month, then she'll live. It'll be touch and go for the boy for the first few years of his life. Then if she's still alive at the end of the month, then I'll send her and the child to the southern palace with a small retinue of servants. However, against the odds, she survived, as did her youngest son, and at the end of the month the king kept his word, and they were transferred away from the stress of court and her husband. Because Eshek did not believe this child would survive, he allowed him to remain with the queen, and she named him Zakir. And her husband? He soon found that if he hit anyone in anger, what he doled out came back onto him.